Have you ever wondered what it might be like to mother two children, breastfeed a baby, and launch a business simultaneously in the middle of COVID? Well, you're going to get to hear what that was like from an amazing colleague who is a part of the Massachusetts Lactation Consultants Association and who launched an amazing business in the middle of COVID and who's still working to grow that business and to provide amazing lactation and nutritional support for pregnant and nursing families. So I can't wait for you to hear from my colleague, Emily, and to hear how she managed to do it all and do it with authenticity and to not have to have it all together all the time, even in front of investors and funders, and to help bring reality to the situation that, hey, sometimes you have to stop and breastfeed a baby because babies don't know that you're in a Zoom meeting. So I can't wait for you to hear this beautiful story and to see the places where you relate to her and to feel inspired by her ability to both chase her dreams and to be grounded in her role as a mother. Enjoy. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. Having known only a handful of people who had ever done it and only seeing it up close a couple of times, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a childbirth educator, and an internationally board-certified lactation consultant, or an IBCLC. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore the systemic, medical, and cultural barriers that make feeding our babies so difficult, so that you know your baby feeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
My name is Emily Sylvester. I am the mom of 3 breastfed babies, ages 6 and 3. And I am the founder and CEO of a company called Mother of Fact, and we're a digital health platform that connects families with registered dietitians during pregnancy and beyond for breastfeeding help or maternal nutrition advice and high-risk counseling. I'm also the president of the Massachusetts Breastfeeding Coalition currently and love my work performing breastfeeding advocacy work and helping professionals and community members become more involved in breastfeeding work and advocacy efforts.
My whole show is all about the barriers that we face. People tell their stories, but the reason we even have difficult stories to tell is because of all the societal and cultural barriers. So that advocacy work has benefited me as both a practitioner and somebody who fed my babies in Massachusetts. So I'm so thankful to that work that you do. And you are both an IBCLC and a registered dietitian. Is that right?
I am. I missed saying that. Yes, I have a bunch of letters after my name, which means something, but all it means is I'm passionate and experienced and trained in baby feeding and breastfeeding.
Yeah. And you were you a registered dietitian before you became a parent?
I went to school to become a gym teacher at first, and then thought I wanted to be a dentist. And the prerequisites for dental school was nutrition. So I started taking nutrition courses at the University of New Hampshire, fell in love with nutrition, and the rest is history. I did my internship at the National Institutes of Health down in Bethesda, Maryland, and they're a research facility, right? So they didn't have a birthing unit, mother, baby, NICU, none of that. It was a lot of pediatric research, but I begged, borrowed, and stole all of the, rotations and hours I could get with community members who were doing pediatrics work because I knew that's just what I wanted to do. And then when I left the NIH, coming back here to New England, I landed a position doing early intervention work for whoever is familiar with the early intervention program, working with children 0 to 3, and realized going into people's homes for children diagnosed or at risk for developmental delays, there was a ton of premature babies, newborns with high medical risk, but also moms who were crying on my shoulder being like, nobody is helping me through this. I really want to breastfeed. And in the medical world, we're not trained a lot on breastfeeding, even as a dietitian. And many doctors will tell you the same thing. So I went back to my company. I was like, look, I'm a dietitian. I'm really good at what I do, but I'm not qualified to provide breastfeeding education and support. So they supported me in becoming a lactation counselor. And the rest is history. Became an IBCLC and started my work in baby feeding.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It seems like not that everyone who is 0 to 3, everyone who has a baby who is 0 to 3 breastfeeds, but most people in the US do at least start.
Over
The
80%. Over
right.
80%,
The numbers are really high. Yeah. So it seems like anyone who is in a position to be working with early intervention of nutrition information should be highly skilled in helping parents navigate human milk feeding as well.
Mm-hmm.
But even their pediatricians aren't, and everybody is well-meaning, right? They're all trying to do their part to help improve outcomes
Absolutely.
for families. And it's a systemic barrier when we can't access the people we need. And often that's dictated by insurance companies.
Absolutely.
Especially for low-income people.
And what I'm learning from my work with my company is, there is insurance reimbursable services out there, not as much as there should be, right? We're working on it. But even the things that are out there, there is a lack of access between the providers knowing about it, knowing how to access it, connect people to those individuals who can provide insurance covered services, and those families at home who go home and are like, I know I need help. I don't know how to access these benefits. I can't pay out of pocket. Or maybe they do anyways. Maybe they sacrifice something else to get that help. And so in, what I'm working on right now, it's really like, let's conquer that divide and say, what is covered right now? What are the barriers? Why cannot we connect families fast enough before the problems come up? Because we're looking at preventative insurance codes and measures versus the, what, where then it's like, I just need something, or I make a decision at 12:30 a.m. at night because I don't have that connection.
Right. And I'm exhausted and I'm just doing the best I can in this given moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Mother of Fact, it's meant for providers to use.
Yes. Back in 2019, I was about to go on my third maternity leave and driving home from my NICU clinic, just like in tears, like the hormones, the stress, just being like, I just had so many consults where it was 8-week-old preemie babies who were just being connected with me for the first time when they should have had access to me right from the NICU. Like that's how the program was set up, but it just wasn't functioning that way. And again, nobody to blame, but there's just so much going on in the hospital between politics and staffing and change of, residents, the information flow just isn't there. And I was like, what can I do to make this easier for families and, access those resources that are there and connect the dots? So I decided to found a company.
Of course you did when you were pregnant, about to go on your third maternity leave.
I never knew what a pitch contest was, an accelerator program, which is like those programs that help people in the community learn about business and feel empowered on what they want to build. So I did a first pitch competition, thought I was going to go into labor, like literally on the stage, didn't until 5 days later. But then they were like, you're in this program. Do you want to be? And I had a 2-week, I think Craig was 2 weeks at that point. And I looked at my husband, I was like, do we do this? And he's like, I think you've been thinking about this long enough. Do it. I showed up. He was 4 or 5 weeks old. And from the first business meetings we were having, he was in the sling, he was in the carrier, he was on the floor. And I just had to ramp myself up before starting, saying, I have the right as a woman to start a business in tech. And the percentages there aren't great. I have the right to show up with my baby because that is the primary way I am feeding them. And I have the right to find those people in my network and those I haven't met yet to support me in that. And that was really hard. It's hard to breastfeed in public in front of 60-year-old white bankers who, don't understand, the diversity needs in breastfeeding and the importance of breastfeeding and, just the technicalities of it at all. That was really hard, but it's something I knew I had to do if I was going to be successful, instead of choosing between this is a mission I have and I really deserve to be here to create a solution and be happy in my work and use my skills and also raise a family.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I was choking back tears as you were talking, because so many of us have been in that situation where we feel like we're having to choose between our passions and our family because there's just not enough support, And for anyone who's listening, who's thinking, oh my gosh, like I can barely even wash the laundry or feed my baby and get food in my own mouth. I don't understand how a person had the energy to launch a company at 2 weeks postpartum. Do not judge yourself against that standard. Because this was, first of all, your third baby. And secondly, I think when you find that thing that drives you, it's almost like you can't not do it. Somehow you're able to do that thing. But I know that when I have worked in jobs as a mom where I liked my jobs, I never worked in a job I didn't like. So I liked my jobs. I always felt like my work was impactful, but there's a difference between that and the drive you feel when you know, oh my gosh, this is how I'm going to make an impact. And there's a different amount of energy that comes to you.
Absolutely.
When you're doing that work. Yeah.
And plenty of mistakes, but I love how you brought up the drive, right? And that goes to any new mom, pregnant person, like tapping into what drives you and holding on to that can be like really super important, even in those times where you're like, I can't even open my eyes. My eyeballs are on fire and I haven't taken a shower in 3 weeks. I mean, I definitely showed up to business meetings being like, haven't washed my hair in 12 days. You guys are just going to have to deal with it,
Right.
And making that normal.
Okay. So I am so excited to hear more about your postpartum and your work experiences in particular, because I think that's such an important topic. But I want to take you back to at this time when you're a registered dietitian, you're realizing, the impact that baby feeding had on families. And even back before that, what was your experience with breastfeeding culturally before you became a dietitian, maybe even back into your childhood? Did you see it at all?
Not really. No. My mom had difficulties in breastfeeding. I'm the oldest of 4 and my youngest sister is 13 years younger than me, right? So I do remember my mom being postpartum and dealing with the breastfeeding issues, and my sister Lydia going to the emergency room because how dehydrated she was and just that lack of support. And what's really interesting, Lo, is I grew up on a dairy farm, right? So I grew up like getting nutrition from cows, the dairy industry, waking up before high school, feeding calves. So it's been a really interesting journey going from there to this and navigating the baby feeding nutrition space as it is, knowing that human milk, right, is a premier nutrition source. And then the other nutrition source is cow milk based. But growing up, no, I never really thought about breastfeeding and even getting nutrition and taking nutrition courses. My interns, my dietetic interns that work for me now, when they start with me, I say, what is your experience with breastfeeding, baby feeding, maternal, child nutrition? And I now lead saying, if it's only life cycle, which is our course we take, which is the one course that we're guaranteed to get breastfeeding education, even if it's just life cycle, like that's okay. but to find out what their experience is. And 9 times out of 10, it's life cycle. I think it's super important to kind of introduce to kids younger, and get back to your questions about how I came into it. You know, it was the real life experience of those moms sitting next to me, like clearly in the middle of a traumatic experience. And they weren't all traumatic, right? Some of it was like, I'm, breastfeeding, this is going really well, but I just have this one little question about growing or pooping, right? But what drove me was like seeing these families just getting home and the umbilical cord for their support just being cut off when it comes to breastfeeding and human milk nutrition support. And especially, it's okay. Like most of them came home mixed feeding just because of the things that were going on. And that's fine, but there was no support in helping them get back to their goal, whatever it was.
Exactly.
Last night, as a family, we had the rare opportunity to just have one child at home. We had not eaten dinner yet, and it was getting pretty late, but we asked him, "It's just the 3 of us. What would you like to do?" And my son said he wanted to take a walk at a nearby reservoir. And neither my husband and I were stressed out about this because we had a refrigerator full of Feast and Fettle, which had delivered home-cooked meals right to our front door that we knew when we came home from our walk, all we would have to do was just heat and serve it. So off we went on our walk right around sunset, around the reservoir. It was beautiful, just the 3 of us and our dog. And then we came home, and within 15 minutes, we had the most delicious coconut crusted cod and roasted cauliflower. And we ate it while we played Uno together. And the cleanup was so easy. And it made our evening so amazing after a full day of work and allowed us to connect with our child. And this is why I am so happy that Feast and Fettle is a partner of the podcast, because I truly believe that anything that allows families to spend more time together and less time worrying about all the things they need to do, like getting dinner on the table, is something I can get behind. So if you would like to see what Feast and Fettle can do for your family, go to feastandfettle.com and use my code MILK to get $30 off your first week's order. And let somebody else do the cooking for you and just go take that walk. If you want to have less anxiety and more confidence so that your parenting journey can feel like you always wanted it to feel, then go to my website right now so that you can have a person by your side who not only knows how you feel, but who combines my expertise of lactation with your expertise of your body and your baby to help you make the next right step in your lactation journey, because that's all you really need to do is make the next right step. And right now, that next right step is going to my website, www.quavinbirthservices.com. And I can't wait to see your name pop up in my inbox or on my phone, on my text messages. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, and I've noticed this disconnect just in ordinary hospital practice, but it becomes escalated in parents whose babies spend any amount of time in the NICU, that you get all the support at the hospital, but then there's a disconnect in the referrals. A lot of people that I talk to, they don't even know that private practice lactation consultants exist. And I'm sure many people don't know that registered dietitians that focus on 0 to 3 exist. And then to have the combo of someone who is both is like finding a unicorn. Speaking of unicorn spaces. So then somehow there's this, like, NICU families say, yes, you can call us, you can ask questions of our IBCLC, but how tapped out are the IBCLCs in the hospital practice who work their 8-hour shift or 9-hour shift or 12-hour shift sometimes? They can't get to every person who calls to have a question, nor can they provide that deep amount of care. And so if there were some sort of handing off process, like, great, you've graduated from the NICU, you're going home, but you're still going to need a lot of support. Here are 3 or 4 IBCLCs who are private practice in your area. Make sure you a few of them and decide who you think would be the best fit for your family. In the same way that we make sure people are connected with a pediatrician before they leave the hospital.
I just saw a recent image of like the follow-up and triage process between having a C-section and feeding a baby versus like having knee surgery.
Ugh.
And like you get referral to a PT automatically. You have 5 or 6 visits set up with the orthopedic and your regular doctor to follow up. And like after having a baby, it's like you have 1 6-week checkup.
Right.
And you have to ask for any other referrals. So they're just not put in place in the system.
Right. And sometimes people don't even know about the referrals that are available. And if the doctor doesn't provide that referral, then they're just stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Massachusetts Breastfeeding Coalition, I mean, we are so, lucky to be able to support something called Zip Milk, where it's a free online platform where families can go and look up lactation support, whether that looks like free breastfeeding groups, private practice IBCLC, or breastfeeding counselors that provide education and support in the community. So that is an option that we're like so excited to keep kind of pushing forward. That was a little plug, but
absolutely. I love Zip Milk. And how many states are you in right now?
Oh my gosh.
Zip Milk.
I am probably going to misrepresent this, but we are in I think it's like 9.
Great. Yeah. So it's definitely a great place to start, or your state's breastfeeding coalition.
Yeah.
If somebody is looking for resources, especially if you have been, because a lot of people who listen, they've already been in the situation. I'm hoping to have more and more people in the prenatal period listen so that they don't have to experience what other people have experienced. But if you have now gone through this and you think, oh my gosh, how can I support my friends who might be having a baby? Don't tell them your horror stories. If they ask, you can give them specifics, but also provide them the names and numbers of people who can support them once they get home. And that way they already have those numbers available so that when they're in that crisis situation, they'll be able to do that. So thinking back to then you're a registered dietitian and you're seeing these parents, did you become an IBCLC before you became a parent?
I did not become an IBCLC. I became a certified lactation counselor, a CLC.
Okay. Yes.
But what's so hard, and I think a key reason why there's such a lack of diversity in IBCLCs is even after that, you have to have the educational credits. So I had already done my university courses to become, a bachelor's of science. So I had those already, but you kind of need those to move forward. And then the pathway I took, I needed 1,000 hours of active time working with families, even though I helped to kind of launch a baby feeding cafe at Boston Medical Center. I was working in the NICU clinic. I had done work with early intervention. It still took me 5 years, to become an IBCLC. But I remember the agency that did my CLC class said to the audience, they were like, we're going to watch the breast crawl. And for those of you who are done having kids, you are going to want to have another baby because of how beautiful this is. And I remember being 20 something years old and being like, oh, what's this about? And then watching it and being like, oh my God, I'm so excited to do this.
Yes.
Experience the breast crawl and know how important that is and know that that's the foundation building of the breastfeeding journey.
Mm-hmm. When you think back about your work on a dairy farm or growing up on a dairy farm rather, and then seeing that these cows produce this milk, did you have cows that struggled with low milk supply, for instance?
Not really, because guess what happens? This is my dad's role. He was the herd manager. He basically was like the secondary vet, which managed the milk supply, which managed the medication, which managed looking out for early signs of mastitis. I mean, these udders got more attention than 10,000 human boobs, in my opinion, because that was their means of making money. So if you had a cow who wasn't producing as much or needed different silage or grain type, right? Like they were working on that because that was the moolah. And so, the science behind that, I think, even back when I was younger, was like so much advanced than the science around like breastfeeding and human milk feeding.
Because there's no money in supporting the research. So why would we put our dollars into researching that? Right.
$1 billion a day. $1 billion a day. That's what it costs the world for lack of breastfeeding support.
So lack of breastfeeding support then leads to purchasing formula.
Societal cost, lack of
sicker
kids, sicker moms, cognitive and future contribution too.
Right, exactly. So the kind of the domino effect of everything
that's everything combined.
Right.
And that was a number that I knew 4 years ago. So I don't even know what.
Okay, so you had seen all these cows producing milk. And so then did you ever think when you were dealing with families before you had your own kids, why is it so hard for humans to produce milk and it wasn't hard for cows to produce milk? Or did you already know that it was like all the research and the care and attention? Like you could see that disconnect immediately?
So I think there's two things to think about. I think it's societal contribution to breastfeeding. And that's not only about support, right? That's about resources. That's looking about the diversity, inclusion, and help. That's looking at how people are educated, their knowledge level around health instances and health empowerment. That's the advertising and the marketing effect of how we portray pregnancy, motherhood, baby feeding, right? Where there's also huge societal contribution to how a pregnant person even starts thinking about feeding their baby or what their journey is going to look like. And then there's the medical side of it, is my opinion. I separate the two. Because when you think about it, how we birth babies and how medicalized birth is right now, those are the critical first 100 hours, right? Of setting up not only our anatomy to feeding, but our brain and our confidence and the people who are going to be there to help encourage us and empower us when we get home. So that's how I kind of compartmentalize it. And you think about when you think about dairy farming or milking cows, all of those things are in place.
Okay. So now tell me about how all of this thinking about early feeding and getting your CLC and even this knowledge that you had built around cows as a young person, how all that played into then what you set up for yourself during birth, knowing that this is not a birth-centric podcast, but as you mentioned, what happens during a birth can have major impacts on those early feeding experiences and then impact us down the line as well. So when you finally did start your family, what were those first experiences like?
Yeah, I think a couple of things where this extremely contributed. And the first thing being like my birth plan, right? Knowing how important it is to have that birth plan that describes my wishes for feeding afterwards, describes how I want the experience, but also being in the medical field, knowing like that could all go out the window and being comfortable with that. But knowing that that whole team needs to know what my wishes are. And knowing that my partner needs to know that, or mother, or whoever was in the room. And it's those wishes that if they're not known, that people take their own experience and education or how they're trained and they throw that into the bucket, which ultimately affects what happens in your journey. Not to say that those knowledge, education, experience aren't super important, but if you make it known, like, no, I know breastfeeding is important to me. This is why. This is what I want to happen to support me in that. And I went in being like, I don't even want an IV. And I had to like push back on the anesthesiologist department even before I went into labor. Because in the hospital, they're like, well, per guidelines, every mom needs to have a port access to their IV in case there's an emergency. I'm like, I get that. But knowing that and having that conversation early, I was able to be like, wow, I should really stay at home as long as I can. Because maybe if I get there and they don't have time to do the IV, and I'm not saying everybody do this. This is not medical advice.
No, yeah.
But
we're talking about your experience right now.
But then maybe I don't have to have an IV in all 3 babies. Did I have an IV? No.
Great.
No IV.
Yeah. Yeah. And we know that long-term use of IV fluids, for instance, can cause extra swelling, make latching more difficult, lead to delays in that mature milk finally making an appearance. Yet, when we say, I don't want the IV, we're treated like we're just crazy people who are hysterical about our birthing plan, instead of being treated like, no, this could have long-term implications for the way that I care for my baby. And I'm going to stand my ground here. I don't want IV fluids.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the first thing. And then knowing what happens immediately after, like pushing for skin to skin, and knowing the hospital protocol where I was, they did encourage skin to skin, right? But also making that extremely known. And then just asking for breastfeeding support. I went in, so I gave birth at a hospital that I also worked at. So I knew the pediatrician team fairly well. I did not know the in-person nursing team at all because I wasn't inpatient. I didn't tell them I was a CLC. I didn't tell them that I worked in baby feeding. I told them nothing because I was like, I want to see what happens. Like, I want to see what that's like so that I could ask for help, or they would give me the exact instructions that they were giving to everybody else, which was a really interesting experience though, too.
Yeah, your little science experiment. Did your plans pretty much go how you wanted? And did you get those early feeding experiences that you were hoping for?
I did. Everything went pretty swimmingly considering the whole journey we go through.
Yes.
And it's really funny. My second daughter that was born, she was born in March, and they were at capacity. Like, they had no rooms when I went into labor. And I had birthed at home for quite a long time. So by the time we got to the hospital, like, it was time to rock and roll. Like, time to rock it. They didn't have any rooms in the delivery unit open. So because the team, the midwife team and everybody knew my wishes, like, even though we were still in a triage room, which is about 5 by 5 with like 5 people in it, the midwife came in and she's like, I have the aromatherapy. Here's the ball. We're going to do as much as we can. So
it's really conventional in home birth settings.
Exactly.
But
not in the triage room.
Right. Yeah. I've heard a lot of people say that if they have given birth unmedicated in a large teaching hospital, that often a lot of people will come and ask if they can watch it, because it's so rare to actually see it play out that way in the hospital setting, that all the residents want to get physiological birth that has not had any interventions. They at least want to get sight of it, which is really sad when we think, especially in your comparison to the cows who just give birth to their calves. And of course, I'm so thankful for a medical system that allows us to save parents and babies who are in dire medical situations, or even those true emergent situations. I am so thankful that we have that. But the fact that the medicalization has taken over so much of the rest of the birthing process, that has long-lasting impacts on lactation. Because those first moments, you mentioned that breast crawl, if you have had a 3 or 4 day induction, like I did, by the time you get to that last day, you are so exhausted. You do have the happy hormones. Of course, you're so excited to see your baby, but it's not that same euphoric feeling of, oh my gosh, I just did this. I'm so excited. And that hormonal connection is there for a reason. That feeling of like, oh my gosh, I did it. Here's my baby. I'm excited, is more likely to happen if you are not completely depleted and exhausted. And that euphoric feeling helps to bring our milk supply in. Were you able to see the breast crawl for your babies?
I did. Then it was business. Then it was like, What the heck am I doing?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about that.
Yeah, just the fact that for a while it was said around that, like, if it hurts, you're not breastfeeding right. Like, it's not, breastfeeding isn't supposed to hurt. And like, yeah, I agree with that to some point, but there's no way you're going to have a baby feeding on you every 2 hours and practicing and learning together that you're not going to have some soreness. So I experienced that. And that's where the self-doubt came in, where I was like, well, I am sore. Oh, I do have a cracked nipple. Like, am I really not doing this well? And like really working through that and asking for help when I needed it. So I think that was one of the biggest things for me. And then dealing with like thrush and, the around the clock feeding, all of those things that we knew was super important. But when you're in it, when you're swimming up the river, it's super important to have that support system who knows your goals and like, no, this is like, you're doing really well. How can I support you? Kind of thing, versus the support system that is like, oh, you look so tired. The baby's feeding again. Why don't we just, get this bottle? Or, in the wrong circumstances, it's the wrong circumstances, right? And just having those people next to you, monitoring you and your mental health around it, but also knowing like, keep cheering you on. Like, because I think I say like the 10-day rule, the first 10 days, like you get through those for the most part, it's like the light starts to appear. And even though I was a dietitian and breastfeeding professional, like I kept that 10-day rule in my head. So even though I was trained in breastfeeding and had the experience and worked with hundreds of families, like those little mantras were kind of what helped me through.
Yeah. Yeah. I just talked to an old friend of like over 20 years yesterday, and we got to talking about, I think he was asking me, he was congratulating me on reaching over 100 episodes of the podcast. So we were talking about that. Yeah. And he was like, he was telling his experience of like just wanting to feed a bottle to help. And both his wife and the nurses in the hospital were like, no, don't do that. And I didn't go into any education with him. He was just sharing his experience. But I was thinking, wow, like, how great would it be if we help dads to understand, look, these are the signs of postpartum depression. This is the normal window of like anxiety and that normal hormonal fluctuation. This is when it becomes outside of that window. These are the like intrusive thoughts to look for that many breastfeeding parents experience, that knows that, okay, you need to get help. These are the numbers that your wife can call when she's in the crisis mode, because often we direct all of that stuff, your wife or your partner, we direct all of that stuff to the woman or to the birthing person. And we forget that she does not have all the mental space to carry it all.
Yeah.
So if the partner knew, okay, this is my job and I am going to support my partner to make sure her mental health is as good as it can be in the situation, and that we have the resources for her to reach out when she needs to, how empowering would it be for that partner to know, okay, I do have a job and this job is very serious. And it does not necessarily require me offering to feed the baby with a bottle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100% agree with that.
So was there anything that happened in your maternity leaves between, with your baby feeding for either first, second, or third child that is of note before we go into what the transition was like going back into work?
On maternity leave, one thing that I'm so thankful I did is for every single baby, for every single day of maternity leave, I took a photo. And I posted, so I was on Instagram. So I was like, I'm just going to post it to Instagram because then it lives. And no matter what happens, like, kids could see that in my family. And because we did invite family in quite early, just because close my family is and how supportive I knew they were going to be. There were people in my network, right, that I wasn't going to be like, come over for like chips and crackers.
Right.
No, but they wanted to be involved with it. So that was a way to include them without feeling the burden that I needed to like keep up with my circles. So now it goes by in a flash, right? The days are long, the time is short. So now I have at least one photo with a small description of like what happened that day, even if it was like, we didn't sleep at all and my daughter poured flour all over the kitchen and I had to clean it up. But look at this beautiful, like at the time it didn't feel beautiful, but now I look back and it's like, yeah, that was like an important thing that happened because it was life. So I did want to mention that, and something I'm super thankful that I was able to do. It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
Being like sometimes at midnight being like, oh my gosh, I didn't do a picture today, and like taking a picture of like the baby in the dark in the bassinet, but then just like writing like a sentence.
Didn't get to a picture today.
Right.
Here it is.
Here it
right.
is.
And that's part of that postpartum experience too. Yeah. Oh my gosh, what a great idea. I've not heard anybody else say that. So then did you have the standard 10, 12, 14-week maternity leave with your first?
My first, I had exactly 3 months before my time ran out. With my second baby, it was a little bit longer. I think it was like 14 weeks or 15 weeks of leave before going back to the hospital to work. And the last one was when I decided to start Mother of Fact. So because of I was under union and there was protection of my job, I didn't get paid the entire time, but I was allowed to take 6 months. So I took 6 months knowing that I kind of wanted to figure this thing out and enjoy my last baby and just financially figuring it out. So then I did go back. I went back to the hospital full time and then was able to, because I did like 4 days, like I had a schedule where I could kind of have like those days free to still dabble in Mother of Fact a little bit part-time. But then COVID hit 2 months after I went back from maternity leave. So I had an 8-month-old. COVID hit. I was still working for the hospital doing breastfeeding and nutrition telehealth visits from my bedroom with 3 kids at home. And also trying to figure out like, what do I want to do with Mother of Fact? Like, what is going to happen? Still trying to nurture that a little bit. And so that's when like my pumping journey stopped, because I was home working from home telehealth, like literally doing telehealth with like, baby on the boob sometimes. Like luckily I was able to have my mom there to support and, be there to work while the kids.
So you had an extra caretaker.
Yeah. She
house.
also worked for a hospital, so she did have to go and work, but at least having somebody there. I mean, honestly, knowing tons of parents who just did not have that help through COVID and working from home. I mean, kudos to everybody, because it was such a challenging time to figure out day by day. Long story short, I did not leave the hospital. I was still working. I worked for about a year past like that maternity leave. When about a year and a half, I had some mentors who are what we call angel investors. So they're individual investors who invest in early stage startups as a means of kind of making revenue and investing. Instead of like investing in real estate, people invest in companies. And so I had a few female powerhouse CEOs who were my mentors, and they were like, look, Emily, you are going to lose your mind. We believe in Mother of Fact, what you're doing, but you can't grow it unless you leave the hospital. So it was at that point that I kind of had to make that decision, career-wise, family-wise. Where do we go next? And, went full time into being an entrepreneur at that point.
And did you see any impacts on your milk supply or on your breastfeeding relationship, either positively or negatively?
It was stress. I think stress was this last breastfeeding journey. One thing I did worry about a lot around milk supply. Like, am I nourishing myself? I'm not just living on coffee, even though baby is 8 months old, like, and doing solid foods, thinking about that. And I think what was also tough is my last baby, Craig, introducing solid foods. He was my hardest baby. He wanted literally nothing to do with it. And being an infant feeding specialist, I'm like, man, I should really be able to figure this out. But that took a lot of time and energy too. And at that point, his weight wasn't doing the best, right? Because I was still breastfeeding. We were doing the best we could. We were, juggling everything going on with the world. So that was something that I hadn't personally experienced as well, and really gave a new light into even some of the recommendations I give to families around problem solving, feeding, breastfeeding. It has to fit with what's going on with their home life, their environment, their resources. Because if it doesn't, it's not going to work. Right. And even thinking about some of the recommendations, like for me around, baby-led weaning, doing these things, spoon feeding, homemade recipes. At that point, it was just like, what can I do feasibly, easily, quickly, knowing it's nutritious, but just to get him to eat it, because I have to get these calories in and, really let him go at his own pace, but make sure that we're maintaining growth and health.
Yeah. So then as we think about your 8-month-old who was struggling to feed and you were noticing like how difficult this was, how did that resolve? Did you?
A lot of hard work, hands-on teamwork from my partner and I, knowing what I knew about adding calories, knowing what I knew about continuing to breastfeed and the breastfeeding pattern that we could have to support this. And I have to say, it was really surprising to get care from the clinic that I worked at. And at that point, they obviously knew me really well. They knew my family. And going to those visits and having that self-doubt and that worry and being like, what are they going to find today? What's the weight? What are they going to say? But honestly, getting that sincere support, being like, we know you, we know your background, we know you're going to ask for help when you need it, but also almost feeling insecure about it because not every family that we work with gets that. Not every family is really known by their medical team and knows the ins and outs of the knowledge they have, the home capacity and resources they have. And so it made me think a lot about what we need to do to kind of really support. There was a lot of emotion that went into a lot of hard work, and really looking at that support environment and how it worked for us or didn't work for us at points.
Right, exactly. I was just thinking about how your care providers were assuming the best about you and how many people go into these medical appointments with so much anxiety because they don't feel like the people they are going to be interacting with are going to assume the best about them.
Yeah. So from that, for the families and listeners out there, what I started to do, and I still do in my daily work and family life, is before going into an appointment or a situation, we're looking at the calendar next week. We do like rose, thorn, and then something that I'm like really looking forward to. Right. So rose,
yeah, my kids call this rose, thorn, bud.
Rose, thorn, bud. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so thinking about rose, like, what do I really feel confident in? What am I kicking butt in right now? And I'm going to say that to the provider. I'm going to say, like, this is going really well. I'm really confident about that. Starting with that. And then the thorn being like, yeah, I'm really stressed out because, they're only, breastfeeding for 5 minutes at a time and then turning away. And it's really stressing me out. And starting that conversation to get feedback.
I love that.
So I think in medical appointments or appointments, check-ins, whatever, it can be easy to go in and the bright lights hit and it's like, I don't even know what I wanted to say.
Or these are all the things I'm worried about right now.
Yeah.
And then you get thrown into that light of being this anxious parent Oh, I love that. And I love for any providers listening, you can adapt this as a provider. So when you're coming into a client's home, ask them to just take a moment to name what's going really well for you. Like, because I know that there are things that you are kicking butt at. Are you able to like change those diapers every time right away? Because that's amazing and it's hard to do. Like what is it that you feel like I am getting this? If nothing else, this is the thing that I'm feeling really good about in the postpartum period. And then, okay, so what's really your sticking point? And then what are you looking forward to like learning from this particular appointment? Or what are you looking forward to in the next month or couple of months of development of your child? Yeah, I love that. Okay, so as we wrap up, I'm so glad that we got to talk about Mother of Fact and what you're doing sprinkled throughout the conversation. Is there anything else that you want to say about that work and about where people can find you before?
Yeah, I love feedback, support, connection, any way we can. Like I said, we do work with clinical centers mostly right now. But guess what? It's the trust and the feedback of families that is most important to us, because if you will not use it and don't know about us, then that limits how we can grow and help more families. So we are on Instagram at Mother of Fact app. And on Facebook at Mother of Fact. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Emily Sylvester. We post a lot of like more provider empowerment, women's health, the state of digital health and what's going on in digital health there. So find us, interact with us, let me know feedback on anything you see, because our work is for the families and the birthing people and the moms.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'll have all of those links in the show notes for anyone who would like to check that out and follow you and follow your work. And I so appreciate you taking the time out of your busy CEO life to come share your personal stories and how that has led you to the work that you are doing now to try to make impact where you can. Because that's all any of us, we can't change all the systems everywhere, but we can decide where we do want to make impact. And if we can focus on that, then we can all stay a little bit more sane.
100% agree. Thanks for having me, Lo.
Whether you are a parent working outside of the home or whether you work inside the home, taking care of your family and your household, I hope that you were able to glean some inspiration from Emily and from her story of changing the world around her and of just taking each day as it came and doing the best she could in the moment, because that's what we're all trying to do. And wherever you are in your work, in your career, in your family life, I applaud you, because I know that you are doing the best you can in every given moment. And none of us have to be perfect in what we do. We just have to do our best. And I know that's what you're doing. I would love to talk about this idea of having to present perfection in motherhood and perfection in the workplace as mothers. So if you would like to talk about that, please join me in my Milk Making Minutes community group to discuss it. What have your experience has been as you've been in meetings or have had to leave to pump or have needed to schedule pumping time? Or how have you felt about breastfeeding your baby in front of coworkers, for instance? I would love to know your experiences with this. So please join me there so that we can discuss these barriers to being both parents and people who work outside the home. So join me there. Can't wait to hear from you. Bye.